give this a try. This is my first screencastify for you. We'll see how it goes. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through this first part of the epic so that you can see how I take it apart and I read through it, because it can be daunting if you just sit down with all this text and go crazy. So before we get started, the most important thing when you're looking at Anglo-Saxon literature is you need to be able to chunk it. You need to come up with pieces. And so the way that you really want to chunk Anglo-Saxon literature is to look for sentences in the text. That's going to be the first way for you to kind of break it into pieces. So let's just jump right into it. We have the beginning of our epic right here. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go look for the first break, the first place where it kind of stops. And I have the end of a sentence. And that's all I want to work with to begin with. I mean, it's 14 lines, it's quite a bit, but that's all I want to do right now. So I'm going to look through it. It says, a powerful monster, living down in the darkness, growled in pain. Impatient, as day after day the music rang loud in that hall, the harp's rejoicing call and the poet's clear songs sung of the ancient beginnings of us all, recalling the Almighty making the earth, shaping these beautiful plains marked off by oceans, then proudly setting the sun and moon to glow across the land and light it. The corners of the earth were made lovely with trees and leaves, made quick with life, with each of the nations how now move on its face. So that's a lot when you're looking all at once to kind of deal with. So let's kind of break it up a little bit more. I'm going to look for subjects and verbs. I'm going to look for really what's the meat of this sentence, what's actually happening. So I have this monster, he lives down in the darkness, and he's growling in pain. That's kind of the basis here. So if I were to kind of paraphrase or rewrite, I have a monster, and he is mad. I'll give him a little mad face. Roar. I'll draw that in there. So now we have to kind of figure out, why is he mad? And so the rest of the sentence, the rest of this little chunk here is going to give us those clues. It says, as day after day, the music rang loud in the hall. So he's in pain, the music is loud, and really that's kind of what's driving him crazy. The music is loud. And then it goes on to tell us a little bit more about the music. So the harp's rejoicing call and the poet's clear songs, sung of the ancient beginnings of us all, recalling the Almighty. And here's an important kind of clue here. Almighty has a capital A. So we know that we're not just talking about being happy that, the world was built. We're talking specifically about God and God's creation. And again, I would give that a capital letter too. So the songs that are hurting him and bothering him aren't just any old song. They're songs about creation. And this is an example of what we were saying with the Christian elements kind of being inserted into this pagan epic. So you have this tale of this monster and this hero, but at the same time, it's ultimately a fight between good and evil. And so when the monks were writing all of this stuff down for the first time, they said, hey, we can kind of mix these two things up. So we've inserted some Christian elements here. We still have our main story, but now we can kind of make this a little bit less pagan by saying not only, yes, he's a monster and he's mad, but he's mad because these songs have to do with God and God's creation. So we're going to keep going. And then is now warriors sang of their pleasure. So Hrothgar's men lived happy in his hall, till that monster stirred, that demon, that fiend Grendel, who haunted the moors, the wild marshes, and made his home in a hell, not hell, but earth. So here's my next break, and I'm going to kind of, just pause and figure out what's going on. So he's mad. The men in the hall are happy. They're singing their pleasure. Men are happy until that monster stirred. Till the monster stirred. The men are happy until Grendel gets upset, until he stirs. He was spawned in that slime, conceived by a pair of those monsters born of Cain, murderous creatures, banished by God, punished forever for the crime of Abel's death. So here again, I've got a sentence, and I'm going to pause and just kind of assess. So right away, I've got Cain and Abel. I've got the creatures banished by God. So these are all specific biblical allusions. I'm not just talking about creation now. I'm talking about the specific story of Cain and Abel. And this is an example of these Christian elements. Not only is Grendel evil, but he is directly descended from first evil, from the first murderers. So he's descended from Cain. And when you're looking at the language, remember we have all these special things about the Anglo-Saxon literature. You have the kennings, you have the alliteration, you have the beats per line in the caesura, but you also just have a lot of description because this was going to be sung by a bard or told by somebody who was entertaining people. And this is an excellent example. Instead of just saying like he was created, he was born. No, he was spawned in that slime. So this is fantastic imagery. And if you have a sibling, you should definitely tell them they were spawned in slime. All right, so we're going to keep going. The Almighty drove those demons out, referring to Cain and the murderous creatures and all of these. Drove those demons out, and their exile was bitter. Shut away from men, they split into 1,000 forms of evil. Spirits and fiends, goblins, monsters, giants, a brood forever opposing the Lord's will, and again defeated. So we have a lesson, we've inserted this lesson here, that basically evil begets evil. And this kind of adds to the frustration for Grendel is that he's evil, but he also kind of can't escape being evil. It is his destiny. It is his weird to be evil and to fail also, because you see this brood is forever opposing the Lord's will, but they are again and again defeated. So the idea here is that evil cannot win. So Grendel has all these reasons to hate the songs, to hate the Lord. He can never rejoice. He can never be, he can never win. He's always going to fail. So of course he's mad. So that's the end of this first little section. And we have a general idea. We have this monster living in the darkness. He's in pain. He hates that they're singing and they're happy about God. The men are happy, but Grendel is absolutely not. And that's kind of where it leaves us for this next part. So we're going to jump right in here. Then when darkness had dropped, Grendel went up to Heorot, wondering what the warriors would do in that hall when their drinking was done. So that's a pretty easy one. They partied. He crept up there. He sneaks up in the night. This is the hall that they're in. This is Hrothgar's Mead Hall. And basically the lords back then would have like a big mead hall, a big gathering place for everybody to feast and join together at night. He found them sprawled in sleep, suspecting nothing, their dreams undisturbed. They're just snoozing. They're happy. They're like, okay, hanging out. The monster's thoughts were as quick as his greed or his claws. He slipped through the door, and there in the silence snatched up 30 men, smashed them unknowing in their beds, and ran out with their bodies, the blood dripping behind him, back to his lair, delighted with his night's slaughter. Well, okay. So he doesn't even hesitate. He creeps in, grabs 30 men, and drags their smashed bodies to his lair. Delighted with the night's slaughter. Again, that's great language. At daybreak, with the sun's first light, they saw how well he had worked. This, I think, is interesting because it hints to us that maybe they didn't even notice. He was quiet. He snuck in. He slunk in. You have a lot of these sounds up here, these S's, sprawled in sleep, slipped through the door in the silence, snatched the men, smashed them unknowing, and then he runs out. So he's committed this crime. He's created this horrible death scene of, body parts and blood and gore, but they don't even notice until the next morning, when they woke up and broke their feast, and they were sad, and they see his work. They see the mess, basically, and they mourn. Hrothgar, their lord, sat joyless in Heorot, a mighty prince, mourning the fate of his lost friends and companions, knowing by its tracks that some demon had torn his followers apart. So again, we have evidence that nobody even actually witnessed what Grendel was doing. They didn't see him commit this crime. So Hrothgar is sad. Sad Hrothgar. Give him a little crown. He wept, fearing the beginning might not be the end. And this is a nice short little sentence that just kind of gives us an important detail. He fears it isn't over. And that night Grendel came again, so set on murder that no crime could ever be enough, no savage assault quench his lust for evil. So, yep, Grendel comes back. Then each warrior tried to escape him, searched for rest in different beds, as far from Heorot as they could find, seeing how Grendel hunted only when they slept. So at first they just tried kind of like going elsewhere. And the only way to be safe, distance was safety, it says. Distance is safety. The only survivors were those who fled him. Hate had triumphed. So Grendel ruled, fought with the righteous. So the only way to survive is to leave. Is to abandon Heorot. And nobody's going to do that because that's where you live. That's where your lord is. That's where your meat is. All right, so we're going to flip over here. It says, so Grendel ruled, fought with the righteous, won against many, and won. So Heorot stood empty and stayed deserted for years. So we're skipping a lot of time here in this little chunk. 12 winters of grief for Hrothgar, king of the Danes. Sorrow heaped at his door by hell-forged hands. This is a neat little thing here. Remember we talked in your Anglo-Saxon literature notes about kennings and how often they would smash a bunch of words together to kind of represent something else. So this is a kenning, hell-forged hands. They're referring to Grendel. Okay. So for 12 years, Grendel plagues Heorot. His misery leapt the seas, was told and sung in all men's ears. So this is important. Leapt the seas. It's a story. It's a tale being told, but it's not just being told in Denmark. It has leapt the seas. It has climbed over the seas and gone to all these other lands. How Grendel's hatred began, how the monster relished his savage war on the Danes, keeping the bloody feud alive, seeking no peace, offering no truce, accepting no settlement, no price in land or gold, and paying the living for one crime only with another. So this is just kind of telling us that Grendel was just doing this to be evil. This is just pure evil. They can't bargain. They can't, there's no way to make peace with Grendel. He just wants to show up and kill everybody. No one waited for reparation from his plundering claws. This is an important Anglo-Saxon element or an Anglo-Saxon idea. The term wergeld means man price. So, Grendel is killing all these men, and during that time, somebody had to be responsible for making up for that. Who's going to take care of your family? Who's going to take care of your people, your land? And what they're saying is that nobody is waiting for reparation from Grendel. So not only is Grendel evil, but he kind of represents the antithesis of these Anglo-Saxon virtues. This idea of wergeld, he's the very opposite of it. He's like, I'm going to kill your men regardless of how important they are, how worthy they are. That shadow of death, hunted in the darkness, stalked Hrothgar's warriors, old and young, lying and waiting hidden in mist, invisibly following them from the edge of the marsh, always there, unseen. So he's always present. And that's literal, and it's also kind of figurative too. Like, he's always on their minds. They can't escape the idea of him. So mankind's enemy continued his crimes, killing as often as he could, coming alone, bloodthirsty and horrible. Just more death. Though he lived in Heorot when the night hid him, he never dared to touch King Hrothgar's glorious throne, protected by God, God whose love Grendel could not know. So remember we said that we've got these Christian elements kind of added in here. And we find out that, 12 long years of attacking and killing Danes and committing murders, but he does not touch Hrothgar's throne. And we see that is because it is protected by God. There's these Christian elements again. And then this little thing here, this is kind of an interesting idea, or this is an interesting concept, that maybe some of his anger is because he cannot know God's love. Whether he wants to or not, he cannot know God's love. He was born into this. But Hrothgar's heart was bent. The best and most noble of his council debated remedies, sat in secret sessions talking of terror, and wondering what the bravest of warriors could do. So I can't do anything. They're stumped. And sometimes they sacrificed to the old stone gods. Here's these pagan gods, these Anglo-Saxon gods, the Norse gods, made heathen vows. Ooh, there we go. That's a great word with a Christian element, right? Hoping for hell's support, the devil's guidance, and driving their affliction off. That was their way and the heathen's only help. They even They even prayed to these pagan gods. They were kind of at their wits' end. It was their way, and the heathens' only hope, hell always in their hearts, knowing neither God nor his passing as he walks through our world, the Lord of heaven and earth. Their ears could not hear his praise nor know his glory. So we kind of took a quick steer away from the main story to throw in this reminder like, hey, don't abandon God, because if you abandon God, he won't help you. He will not really abandon, but let's just say he will not help. And so, calling to God didn't help. So they called to the old gods. That didn't help. But then calling to the old gods, removes them from God. Let them beware those who are thrust into danger, clutched at by trouble, yet can carry no solace in their hearts, cannot hope to be better. Hail to those who will ride. So we've got just this, we end with this kind of a Christian moral, like, don't abandon God. All right, had a little pause there, sorry. All right, so then we have our last little section here. So the living sorrow of Healfdane's son. Oh, look, Healfdane's son, huh, what? This is referring to Hrothgar. And calling him this is a kenning. Okay. The living sorrow of Healfdane's son simmered, bitter and fresh, and no wisdom or strength could break it. That agony hung on people and king alike, harsh and unending, violent, cruel, and evil. This is an interesting little phrase, the living sorrow, because it doesn't stop. It keeps going and going and going. In his far-off home, Beowulf, Hygelac's follower, oh, there's another kenning, and the strongest of the Geats, greater and stronger than anyone anywhere in this world, heard how Grendel filled the knights with horror, and quickly commanded a boat to be fitted out, proclaiming that he'd go to that famous king, would sail across the sea to Hrothgar now, when help was needed. So, Beowulf is a Geat from Gutland, and he hears this story because remember the story has leapt the oceans, and he's a great hero, strongest of the Geats, greater and stronger than anywhere in the world, and he decides, I'll go help this king. None of the wise ones regretted his going, much as he was loved by the Geats. So even though he's like the best ever, he's loved by them, but nobody regrets him going because the omens were good and they urged the adventure on. And remember that for Anglo-Saxons, it was a warrior culture. And so the idea of going out and seeking adventure and helping other people brings your people glory. And that's kind of the most important thing to these Anglo-Saxons, to these Vikings. So Beowulf chose the mightiest men he could find, the bravest and best of the Geats, 14 in all, and led them down to their boat. He knew the sea would point the prow straight to that distant Danish shore. So Beowulf and his 14 men head off to Denmark. They're going to return glorious with treasures, with all kinds of amazing things. So that pretty much gets us through this first section, and I will take a picture and I will load this whole thing up so that you guys can see it and look at it and look at annotations and kind of decide, are you comfortable going chunk by chunk? And if you need a copy of the epic, print it out and write on it, because for me that's really super important. You'll see if you look at the PDF of the epic from my textbook that I've written all over that sucker. I put notes, I put comments, I circle and bubble and highlight, and all of those things help me to kind of look at what's important and pick out the details and paraphrase and all of that.